NM cables are approved for use in these connectors. The issue arises because the inspector interprets the conductor sizes. The listing also references Article 314.17b, clarifying that other conductor sizes are permissible. Article 314.17b allows the use of NM cable in cable connectors approved for the purpose. If using coated conductor cable, the special non-metallic jacket is deemed a suitable covering when used with these connectors. To alleviate inspector concerns, it is advisable to carry a copy of the connector listing during inspections, highlighting that it aligns with Article 314.17b. This documentation should provide the inspector with the necessary information to justify the use of the connectors with number 12 NM cable. Supplementally, carry a copy of Article 314.17b to reinforce the listing. Additionally, consider contacting the authority having jurisdictions, or AHA office, to confirm the inspector's code interpretation. In detail, let's explore the nuances of this situation. The electrical codes are complex, and interpretations can vary. The inspector's caution stems from a focus on the literal wording of the connector listing. However, electrical codes often use examples to illustrate a principle rather than providing an exhaustive list of every acceptable scenario. The phrase "approved for the purpose" is crucial. It signifies that if a connector is designed and tested for use with NM cable and is appropriately sized, it can be used even if the specific cable size is not explicitly mentioned in the listing example. Article 314.17b is key to understanding this allowance. This section of the National Electrical Code, or NEC, addresses the methods for securing cables to boxes, conduits, or fittings. It permits the use of fittings specifically designed for the type of cable being used. In the case of NM cable, connectors listed for NM cable are considered approved for the purpose. The listing on the connector box is not the only determining factor. The overall approval for NM cable is. The inspector's concern about the cable size may also stem from a concern about fill capacity. Overfilling a connector can damage the cables or create a fire hazard. However, if the connector is appropriately sized for the number and gauge of conductors being used, this is not a valid concern. To address the inspector's concerns effectively, prepare a comprehensive and respectful presentation of the relevant information. Firstly, obtain the complete listing information for the connector from the manufacturer's website or catalog. This document will often provide more detailed information about the connector's approved uses than what is printed on the box. Secondly, highlight the portion of the listing that states the connector is suitable for use with NM cable. Point out that the example cable sizes provided are not exhaustive. Thirdly, provide a copy of Article 314.17b from the NEC. Clearly explain how this article allows for the use of connectors approved for the purpose with NM cable. Fourthly, if the inspector remains unconvinced, respectfully request a clarification from the AHA. The AHA is responsible for interpreting and enforcing the electrical code in their jurisdiction, and their opinion carries significant weight. Fifthly, consider the type of NM cable being used. If it is coated conductor cable, emphasize that the special non-metallic jacket provides adequate protection when used with approved connectors, as mentioned in the answer. Sixthly, ensure the connectors are properly installed. Correct installation is always essential for safety and code compliance. Make sure the cables are securely clamped and that the connector is tightened appropriately. Seventhly, maintain a professional and respectful demeanor throughout the discussion. Approaching the inspector with a confrontational attitude will likely be counterproductive. Aim for a collaborative approach focused on ensuring safety and code compliance. Eighthly, document everything. Keep records of all communications with the inspector and the AHA, as well as copies of all relevant documents. This documentation can be valuable if future issues arise. Ninthly, consider further education. Attend continuing education courses on the NEC to stay up to date on the latest code changes and interpretations. This knowledge will help you better understand and address inspector concerns. Tenthly, remember that electrical codes are constantly evolving. Stay informed about changes to the NEC and local amendments. This proactive approach will help you avoid future misunderstandings with inspectors. Now, let's discuss some specific scenarios that might arise. Suppose the inspector argues that the connector is only approved for use with solid conductor NM cable, and you are using stranded conductor cable. In this case, you would need to consult the connector listing to see if it specifies solid or stranded conductors. If the listing does not specify a conductor type, it is generally understood that the connector is approved for use with both solid and stranded conductors of the appropriate size and type. Suppose the inspector argues that the connector is not listed for use with the specific brand of NM cable you are using. In this case, you would need to consult the connector listing and the cable manufacturer's specifications. If both the connector and the cable are listed for general use with NM cable, the brand is typically not a factor. However, if either the connector or the cable has specific restrictions or limitations, those must be followed. Suppose the inspector argues that the connector is being used in a location where it is not permitted, such as a wet or damp location. In this case, you would need to consult the connector listing and the NEC to determine the approved locations for the connector. Some connectors are specifically listed for use in wet or damp locations, while others are not. It is essential to use the appropriate connector for the environment. Suppose the inspector argues that the connector is not providing adequate strain relief for the cables. In this case, you would need to ensure that the connector is properly installed and that the cables are securely clamped. The connector should prevent the cables from being pulled or strained, which could damage the connections or create a fire hazard. Suppose the inspector argues that the connector is not properly grounded. Grounding is a critical safety requirement in electrical systems. The connector must be properly grounded to ensure that any fault current will safely return to the source, tripping a circuit breaker or fuse and preventing electrical shock. Most metal connectors are automatically grounded when they are properly installed in a metal enclosure. However, some connectors may require additional grounding measures. Always follow the manufacturer's instructions and the requirements of the NEC for grounding electrical connectors. Remember that communication is key. If you encounter a disagreement with an inspector, try to understand their reasoning and explain your position clearly and respectfully. By working together, you can ensure that the electrical installation is safe and code compliant. Ultimately, the goal is to ensure the safety of the electrical system and its users. Code compliance is a critical part of achieving that goal, but it is not the only factor. Always exercise good workmanship and use sound engineering judgment when installing electrical equipment.